Hey, what's going on everybody? James here, and we are back with another video in our Watch Basics series. And so today we are going to be touching on another fun movement finishing topic, which is Côtes de Genève. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that is, give you some examples of it, and then talk through some considerations that you may have as you're looking at the watches out there in the real world. So if this is your first time stopping by the channel, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And here on my channel, I'm a big proponent that I want you to get out of watches, whatever it is that you want to get out of watches. And that may be different for you and I, and that is okay, because there's room enough in the hobby for everybody, because I want you to know and love the watches that you have so you can be a satisfied collector. So with that said, let's dive into our topic of Côtes de Genève. So I've got 3 examples of hand finishing in terms of the watches that are here today. So you know these watches if you've seen my channel before. I've got my Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin Perpetual Enamel. We've got the Dan Reuter DR02 with this beautiful blue lacquer dial. And then we've got my Girard-Perregaux 1966 Orion, which I am still continuing to love as both a dress, formal, casual, just all the things. The dial is absolutely fire, which is fantastic looking. So, but we're talking about the backside of these watches today. So let's take a look at them and talk about what is Côtes de Genève. So let's start here because it's pretty much applied to the entire back of the movement. So this is my Jaeger-LeCoultre again. Really, Côtes de Genève, when you're talking about it in simple terms, is going to be a applied finishing technique to a movement of a watch. Typically could be on the bridge, could be on the rotor like you see here. And essentially what it is striping, usually with a mechanical tool. Sometimes it's hand applied, sometimes it's machine applied. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But essentially it's stripes, and there are some different variants of those stripes, which we'll talk about. But really, it's a decorative technique. You know, it doesn't add any functionality to the watch. It just gives the watch a very nice, generally neat look. And different brands of watch will have different levels of finishing when it comes to Côtes de Genève. So let's talk about a couple just to get started as far as the different types. So realistically, you have kind of 3 primary types of Côtes de Genève. The examples that I have here are pretty similar, except for the GP. So you can see on the Jaeger-LeCoultre, it's just plain stripes. So that's, again, your standard Côtes de Genève. They're all in a straight line. In this case, they're mechanically applied to an extent, and then there's some hand finishing along with it, which is nice. You know, some brands will do everything mechanically applied, and then, of course, others will do everything by hand. So we'll talk about some examples of what that is. You know, Côtes de Genève just by itself, kind of like, again, you can see on the rotor here, these were hand applied, but really nicely done on the Dan Reuter. So again, a lot of brands that you'll know well for this would be like Alanga Unsona, really high level of hand finished Côtes de Genève. Something like Vacheron Constantin is another one. And you know, lastly, we have this Girard-Perregaux, which is another brand that will use Côtes de Genève. And here you can see it's also not only stripes on the bridge on the movement there, but it's also on the rotor as well, in more of a circular fashion. Something that you call maybe arabesque Côtes de Genève or spiral Côtes de Genève. There's a couple different phrases or terms you can use for it. Omega tends to do this on the back of their open caseback movements. Obviously, they're very mechanically applied in Omega's case, but they do have a very nice look to them. And then the last type that I'll just mention, because it is out there, is something called radial or like a rayon pattern of Côtes de Genève. And very often you'll see this on watches. Sometimes it'll be a tourbillon watch where the, let's turn it this way so you can see the balance. So maybe, you know, if there's a tourbillon on the dial side of the watch, you may see the stripes almost radiating out from a center point that's imagined under the tourbillon. So it could look, you know, kind of almost like a sun ray type of Côtes de Genève. So that's one way that you'll see it applied. And there's others that are just done in a different fashion that aren't straight like this. They're just done in a pattern. And that's more that radial or rayon pattern of Côtes de Genève. So that's just a couple of types. Now we were talking about the quality of it as well. So these three are all mechanically done to an extent with some elements of hand application. And you can see typically, not always, but typically when you have more depth to the stripes, as you can see on these, so when you actually turn it in the light, you can see it's darker on one side and it's lighter on the other. Usually, as you get more depth in them, there is more hand application happening, versus something kind of simple like the GP here, where you don't really get a lot of that. In some lights you can still get some, of course, but typically the flatter it looks, the more mechanically applied it was. And so again, to give you a couple of examples of both types, your hand finished, hand applied examples will be, your Holy Trinity brands, AP, Vacheron, Patek, and then high-end Swiss and independents. So, everything from, I mentioned Lange earlier, to, FP Journe, Moritz Grossman. There's plenty of brands that do all their Côtes de Genève by hand, which is just beautiful. And then, there's also machine applied, like I mentioned. So Rolex is one, they get a lot of flack, but it's still there on some of their open case back movements, but definitely machine applied. And then I already mentioned Omega with their different various like arabesque style Côtes de Genève movements. And they apply that on a lot of their open case backs, but definitely mechanically done. There's no hand finishing in those movements. Now, let's talk about considerations, because that's a little bit of, the art of it, and there's a lot to it. I only mentioned some brands. There's a lot more. You can go and find Côtes de Genève watches all over the place in varying forms. But what are some considerations you should have? And I think this really comes down to some of the topics that I've talked about in other videos of what are you really looking for? What are you looking to get out of the watch? Because if you're looking for the highest level of hand finish, then yeah, you're going to want to go with a Lange, or you're going to want to go with, I talk about, again, Moritz Grossman is a great example, or Romain Gaultier. Like, they have so much hand finishing on them, and it's really, really well done. Or are you looking for a really good value, somewhere in the middle? And honestly, I would probably put these into that category, right? Like, this JLC is an incredible watch, and if it had the same level of hand finishing applied to the movement side as it does to the dial side, which is one of the reasons that I love this watch, it would probably be worth like a way more expensive watch. It would just be way more expensive, in Patek or AP category of expensive. But it's not, it's just not. That's not their focus with JLC, except for some of their really high-end stuff like, Hybris Mechanica or Hybris Artistica, those types of things. Same with the GP. GP is a great watch, great brand. They make excellent stuff. Again, they're beautiful watches. There's the new Laureato 3 gold bridges that just came out, which is absolutely stunning. You talk about hand finishing, there's a lot of it on there. But this is not that. This is just their 1966 collection, the Orion, and it's a beautiful watch, but you're not getting a ton of hand finishing. Again, there's mostly mechanically applied finishing with some hand touches, right? Like the beveling, the perlage on the base plate there. So you still get some of that, but you got to consider what you're looking for. So that these are more value watches, I would say. Again, the Dan Reuter, very independent watchmaker out of New York, and uses all Swiss parts and does a lot of hand finishing on his own. Really beautifully decorated movements, but you've got to ask yourself, what are you looking for? Because there are some watches too that you can find where you're just getting kind of the least expensive piece that has some of that finishing on it, right? So like a Longines, or like a Rado or things like that, where you're looking at a significantly lower price point and still getting some of that finishing, but it's not really to try and be competitive about how great the finishing is. It's just because it's a good value watch and it has some of those finishing elements on it. So I do think that as you talk about these types of things, you can find the different levels of it across the board. There's really quite a spectrum, and you got to ask yourself where you want to be with that and how much it matters to you. Personally, for me, the movement finishing, I like it. It's not the most important thing to me. I've talked about, the aesthetics of my watches before, the functionality, the use case of it. So there's a lot of other things that I do think are more important to me than the movement finishing, which is why this JLC still remains one of my favorite watches in the collection, even though it has very basic movement finishing. Obviously, the dial is a different story. So that is a little bit about Côtes de Genève. So again, I appreciate you stopping by. If you found something useful, please like, comment, and subscribe to the video and the channel. And again, my goal for you is that you get out of watches whatever it is that you want to get out of watches, because I want you to know and love the watches you have so you can be a satisfied collector. So thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll talk to you again next time.